Good morning, everybody. I am Lisa Guerra with Candy Event Consulting, and I was just talking to Chido here, and she was saying, hey, you were on a park bench yesterday, and I was literally trying to find a place where I could plug in my Wi-Fi, Chido. Like it was, I had my van that needed to get fixed. I'm heading to Red Deer today, so you do what you got to do, right?
Make it work.
Wind blowing and getting a bit of a tan, but today I am in my office and so happy to be having this conversation with you today, Chido. We know each other from some time ago now. I think our first touch point was when we launched the very first issue of Moments magazine. 2015 I think was the first one in November, but you were totally like on board with the planning, and we had a big event in Inglewood at the festival hall. So what a gift to be friends still and be working on projects still. But I want to introduce everybody to you, not just as somebody that is a friend and helped me out years ago, but you have been so incredibly active in the events world, event industry, as we say, but also in bringing businesses online, and now as a digital strategist. So exciting to see you blending the two. So can you introduce yourself for everybody that hasn't met you yet?
Thank you, sure. I am Chido Mbavarira, and I am an online business strategist, as you said. And yeah, my journey started 4 years ago, and I got laid off during the recession, and I had to find a way to work and be location dependent because I just finished my event management certificate at Mount Royal, and there was no events, right?
Yeah.
That was a crazy time, I know, for the event industry. And I just got pushed to working online, and I pivoted from a virtual assistant all the way to online business strategist, where I help coaches, consultants, just service-based experts sell more and earn more through selling a signature service online.
Awesome. And amazing, actually, where we touched base again, what was it, like probably 2-3 months ago again, in a bigger way, was when we were looking at our client work and saying, holy smokes, what are we going to do? Like there were so many changes and so many people that were canceling, postponing, trying to move events online. And even if they were looking at 2021 or are looking at 2021, we're looking at hybrid models. And so I'm like, Chido, I need your help, because you navigate the online streaming world, social media world so beautifully that for us to have that assistance of both your consulting services, but also practically, like, what does it mean to get an event online? That sounds, well, not anymore. It doesn't sound easy to me anymore, but at the time it's like, how hard can it be? And we're talking to people like yourself and some other friends and colleagues that when you start digging in and to do it well, it really, you got to know the system and you have to know what you're doing. And so how has that looked for you and your clients in the last couple months?
Yes, being on the online world, I'm used to either attending events online, consuming content online. Most of my education to become a digital marketing strategist was online. So I have experienced events, and now with my work, I get to do the doing for my clients when they want to build communities online, whether being on social media or having virtual summits, we like to call them, master classes. All these things are online, and they just help you reach more people, your dream people, more effectively and meet them where they're at. So it's been a blessing to know all this for the past couple of years, and being able to work with people who are now trying to explore this further and integrating online events, summits into their work and reach more people. It's been very, very exciting for me anyway.
That's awesome. So what would be sort of the no miss issue if you are an event planner, you're planning events for your business or your organization, what would be that no miss factor that you absolutely have to be including if you're trying to move your event online?
Yeah,
I'm just putting on the hot spot.
No, and It's the number one thing that people come to me for, whether they're new or seasoned business owners. And same thing for events, is really understanding your audience and the desires. Saying your event is a weight loss event or a workshop is not enough. The internet space is so noisy. You got to be so clear exactly who you're talking to, the desire they have to come to your workshop, and the problem you're solving. I always say person, problem, promise. If your event title does not say the person, problem, and promise of the event, I promise you, you will not connect as well online promoting that event. So something I always want to make sure when I read someone's website, event, who's the person, what's the problem, and what's the promise. So if you have those three things in the first information of your event, you're golden. I promise you.
Well, and honestly, we will give your information at the end, because even that tidbit, I think even we forget sometimes, because we're lost in the weeds and we've got so much planning, and there's so many layers to the events that we plan. And I'm sure for you guys too, where it really is that you kind of feel like, because you've been marinating in your event plan, you kind of feel everybody knows these things. And it's a beautiful job to really break it down, right? Like, how is it being received?
Yeah, I love it, because someone tells me an event or a business, I'm like, explain to me like I'm 5. And usually that's the disconnect, because we're experts. It's the curse of the expert. We know how to help people, but we don't do a good job of just making it so crystal clear and explaining it like we're 5, what it is we're offering. And I kind of help people do that.
I love that. And I think the idea too of kind of transitioning to our topic for this week, because I really feel like sometimes we can get lost in very complicated conversations about change, and about with the events that we plan, we might feel like we're too busy, there's too much going on to break it down the way that you just did. But the value of that, how important is it for us to, and it's not to be condescending to say, tell it to me like I'm 5. It is meant to be, like you say, there's so much noise, there's so much conversation. And especially now, the last couple of months, where I've had people say, I can't bear another Zoom conference, another Zoom meeting, because we're all online, and I'm feeling it too. Like my eyes kind of get achy at the end of the day, and I'm not wearing headphones today. But yesterday I kept touching my head because I'm so used to wearing headphones. But I think this idea of simplifying is also the way that people can start to put action into motion, like that there's something happening that we can check ourselves, and how are we communicating. I think that's so important. Chido, when I invited you to come on this week, it was right in the thick, like we were, I care very much about including a variety of voices, a variety of perspectives, not just in these kinds of conversations, but in the events that we plan. That is my heart. It's what I've always attempted to do. At the same time, like I've said on my other visits with other friends, is I can only see what I see and what I surround myself with. And I want to challenge everybody that's watching today. Because sometimes we think that we are working in a diverse way, we think that we're being inclusive, or we have somebody on our team that is the advisor for a certain group or a certain perspective, and we think we've got it handled. The reality is there's so much more to this conversation about diversity and inclusion. And having you on, Chido, I loved, we had a couple of exchanges before today, but I loved your idea that you were talking about 5 ways, now I'll have to get it right, 5 ways to
include diversity.
Yeah, to increase your diversity in events. Yeah. And what I really liked about that phrase is that we might be diverse in some ways, but where are we missing the mark? And where are we, and I'll say we as in people that are fair-skinned, people that might not be thinking about color in how we plan or promote our events. I believe that colors are beautiful. I believe that we are not a melting pot. I believe that if there's an opportunity for us to learn from each other, why wouldn't we do that? So it's a little different than our other conversations, but I would love for you to go through those 5 steps if you could, and then let's have a chat about those things and how could we also put those things in motion. Like how people watching today, how can they take something with them for tomorrow back to their planning team so that they can actually see that diversity start to show up in bigger and better ways moving forward.
Absolutely. And when we're, just for the premise of this conversation, when I say diversity, I know it encompasses age, physical abilities, gender, education, and so much more. But I think in the premise of this conversation, I'm going to use diversity in the sense of races, of different races, ethnicities. So I'm going to use Black people or women, people of color as the premise of it. So I'm not saying when I say diversity, it just means race or ethnicity, but just for this conversation, because that's what we're really talking about right now with what's going on. So just a little context before we start. And I'm giving some of these suggestions as someone who's worked in various levels in events, from, you know, support to lead. And I've done every kind of event out there. I don't think there's one event space I have not touched. I've even touched virtual events to conferences and weddings and experiential marketing. So I'm hoping to bring some insight from somebody of color who's worked in these array of industries. And some of the 5 things I would like for you guys to, event planners, to really consider is that just coming from a place of being open, listening, and having these conversations, because they will be uncomfortable. And if you want to be an ally, there's a certain level of maybe discomfort in this, and you're going to make mistakes of what to say, what's appropriate, but you're supposed to make mistakes. We don't know, we're all navigating this brave new world together. So I want to make a safe space for this conversation, which I hope when you have it with people or Black people, people of color, you create that safe space and not just jump into this conversation with agendas, but just fostering safe space.
Love it. And just if I could add to that, Chido, too, that it doesn't have to happen all at once. I think sometimes because we have been hearing so many messages and there's been so much attention right now, which, you know, should be, we should be having these conversations. The tendency can be, if you're a perfectionist, like me in something, where it's like all or nothing. So what can I do to make this enormous change and make this big 180, where there's iterations of this, and it's ways, like you say, maybe you're feeling uncomfortable today, but maybe it'll feel more comfortable tomorrow, and you can add something else on and have deeper conversations and open your eyes. So thank you, I appreciate that.
Great. So I'm glad that was helpful for anyone who does want to have the discussion, just to approach it openly and accordingly. But in terms of diversifying your events, one thing I want people to be aware of or avoid is jumping into this with what I call the invisible minority, like really knowing you need diversity in your programming, your teams, your events, your staff and support. I think if you can look at the people around your Zoom table, your conference, your business, and if you're not seeing diversity, I think that is maybe a little inkling, like something's not right in where I work. Because hopefully, if it doesn't represent what's outside, that's already a cause to be like, why is this so? So welcome that curiosity, and not really trying to justify that there's diversity by looking for the 1-2 people that kind of confirm this, but actually looking openly and saying, who are the people around my table right now?
Yeah, love
that. And from all levels, from, like I said, programming vendors to staff. So really try to dig deep of why your circles look the way they do. Secondly, I think stop with the who you know kind of scenario. In Calgary, it's a lot about who you know. And as someone of color, I don't get access to who you know conversations or contacts. So I know in the event space, it's definitely about working with vendors or people who have built that know, like, and trust factor. And if you're not conscious that you're always going to the same vendors, you're always sticking to your know, like, and trust, you're really dismissing and enriching your event with other people who can bring other things. to your
Exactly.
events.
And to that point, Chido, it may not only be people that you know, like, and trust in your regional area. Like,
Mm.
we live in a wide world right now where there's all across Canada, there's amazing experts. There's people that you can feed into the work that you do. And your experience here in Calgary, for example, might be different than somebody of color in Toronto or Vancouver Island. Like, there's a difference in that. Even rural Canada obviously has different ways of approaching things all over the place. So this idea of your circle, broadening that circle, to me is very exciting. Like, I love that aspect of events, and why we do what we do is we have this reach where we can be pulling team members and people in from all sorts of perspectives. But I love the idea of being intentional and conscious of who is in that circle. Yeah, great point.
Thanks. Yeah. And you just lead into my next point. It's like, think about who you're overlooking. So I gave example of your planning committee, right? Your planning committee is a place you can start looking. You can look at your programming. What are the makeup of your programming table? Your, like I said, your staff. Because I think there's a lot of diversity in the people maybe delivering security or catering, but I find like it stops there. So even asking like, where can I find somebody else with a different perspective? Because I know when I go to an event as a Black person, I look to see who the speakers are. And so many times I see the same people. I can go to a speaking eventually and see the same people who are always speaking and giving these leadership roles. And I encourage a lot of people to look at their past events and who has been speaking, and be a little critical and like, what can we do a little better moving forward.
And to that point, I think that there's, again, we don't know what we don't know, or in our circles, it's natural to be calling on the people we know. It's part of it is a familiarity, and part of it is, and I'll speak for myself too, can be laziness, right? Like, we're moving so fast that in some cases it's like, call Jim, call Nancy, call like we just have people that we would call to fill those spaces, which makes our lives maybe simpler in a way, but also less diverse. And in some ways, how we're being seen by the audience, we're unconscious to that, because when we put through an evaluation, we're not necessarily asking, what did you think about the mix of panel speakers? You know, like, that isn't necessarily a conversation. We're talking about maybe the topic that they're talking about or how they presented. But that's something that I think we need to wake ourselves up to, is how is it being seen, and who's not in the room, who doesn't feel welcome to be there. But yeah, really, yeah, awesome. Sorry, keep going.
Oh, great. And you know, and that goes into like broadening your pool and really like, where can I find this? I loved your last workshop with Lola, because she's somebody very capable in events in Edmonton, has a rich history of diverse events, you know, from all over the world. Like, she's a gem just hiding in the rough in Edmonton. And you know, that's somebody who could bring so many contacts. If you're like, I don't know where to find these people, reach out to people doing multicultural events and ask about who they suggest for programming, vendors and suppliers. That's a great place to build and foster new relationships. Like, you may not know, but be curious enough to go and find the people who have access to bringing that diversity to your events and your programming.
Beautiful.
So, something to consider.
Yep, great. Do we have one more point?
I think we have one more. And, you know, when it comes to the hiring, so great, you're aware, you've contacted Lola, you're like, I want this. And this is where I think, if you're looking around your table and say, oh, we have a couple of Black people, people of color, where I know my experience, I'm going to bring a little scenario of my experience, is that I've worked for companies who have been very inclusive, given me leadership roles, but here's where the disconnect was. They trusted me to be a leader for them, but when I'm working with an audience that doesn't look like me, I was called aggressive, because that audience was not used to a person like me saying no. So my feedback, being aware of the feedback of having their back, I felt there was sometimes a point where they didn't have my back, because they was trying to appease their clients so much that they didn't realize who I was working with, had some resistance. So it's great that the event company is inclusive, but you got to make sure, like, it was sad because I had to have my authority reinforced. Because some people were not taking me like the lead. They'll look at my event assistant or somebody else for answers, and they wouldn't look at me.
Well, and when we talk about racism, specifically racism, and what I've been saying all along is that it may not be said, but it can be incredibly damaging and hurtful to the people that are feeling it. And we may not understand how it's being perceived. But body language, what do they say? I need to know the percentage, but the percentage of body language and some of these unspoken ways of communicating are just as powerful.
Absolutely.
For the positive and for the negative, for sure. But what an example.
Yeah.
So how did you navigate that for yourself?
You know what? I was really hurt. And this is where I think I want to be clear in what racism can look like in just and I call it microaggressions, because there's 3 layers I can just call out of experience of racism. And usually number 1 is the overt white supremacists, right? The people who use racial slurs. And I think people go to that person as being racist, right? They go saying, oh yeah, that's clear. Yeah. Right. And then there's another layer where people may not, say racist stuff, but they know the system works for them and they may not want to challenge it. I was on a podcast with as a guest with this white man, and I even said to him, the resistance from white men saying something is because they have something to lose, but they may not want to dismantle it because it serves them. So there's that other layer where I feel like they're not being overt racist, but they're benefiting it and don't want to disrupt something that works for them. And then finally, what I feel like a lot of my Canadian friends and peers are on this soapbox, like, I am not racist. But to be anti-racist, it's being able to take off those glasses and put anti-racist lens and understand microaggressions that support white supremacy or anti-racist rhetoric. And the examples I have for you is people wanting to call me Samantha over Chido. That you may not think that's racist, but you're confirming that my name has to be socialized or has to assimilate to the norm. So how many people have work with immigrants and they're not calling them the name? They're calling them whatever they want to because it's comfortable.
Right.
That's a small microaggression that I think people do all the time. Like, I'll call you Samantha. It's easy for me. That's a microaggression that you may not be conscious that you do.
And to that point, Chido, so before we went on, because we've known each other a long time, but I don't know that I could pronounce your last name. And for me, if somebody can't, people mispronounce my last name as well, but I just feel like it's a respect point, even though it's something that feels awkward to how I say it because I'm not used to it. It's important for me to understand it. Actually, can you pronounce your last name?
Mbavarira. Yeah.
And so, the silent M, and for you to explain that to me, how it's pronounced, is a gift to me, because then I'm able to try it without messing it completely up. But it's these conversations, I think, that are so important, because I hope you didn't feel offended that I asked how to pronounce it. But I'm learning, right?
And I appreciate that, because like you said, it's respect. And if we can respect a speaker with a very foreign Russian name and we can nail it, you're not showing respect to other people when you're not even trying to say a 4-syllable name because it's not convenient for you. So you can just be aware of those little things. Like, it may be laziness, but I want to hope somebody can take away saying, oh, wow, I have done that. That is something that's not respectful, or I'm saying someone doesn't matter. Even when I submit job resumes, there's assumptions. Does she have an accent? Does she speak English? There's so many assumptions, and something to be curious of, how many assumptions do you have when you see someone called Jane Smith and Chido Mbavarira? You're probably like, I'm going to call Jane Smith because it's easier to say, and we probably, she went to school in rural Alberta. I have more connections with her than this Chido Mbavarira. We have so many questions about. Those are just little microaggressions.
You know what's kind of funny about that, Chido, is that my last name, my girls still go by Dawood as a last name. That was my last name for 12 years. And it's interesting because when I would say Dawood and then I'd get on a call or see them in a meeting or something, and they're like, wouldn't that be sort of an African kind of last name? And yes, they're from South Africa. They're a mixed family, African, British, and East Indian heritage. but a surprise for them to see sort of a light-skinned, Caucasian woman walking in with the last name Dawood. And so I think and now I'm a Garo, and they all ask if I speak French. No, I married into the name. So there's a lot in a name, but at the same time, it really highlights our assumptions around what we think we know about people. So a name is part of our identity, but not to make assumptions about what does that mean for you, for example, as a person of color. What does that, your competence, and like you were saying, when you were planning that event and other people are looking to your assistant or looking to someone else, we need an answer, but it can't possibly be you. Like how are we waking up to that? And then how are we having an interchange where that actually then starts to change? Have you found that there have been ways that you've been able to inform, educate, let people know that that's inappropriate, or to assert your own authority in that situation where you do have the authority?
I think this is an interesting time because people are shifting from I'm not racist to being I'm anti-racist. And being anti-racist is knowing the levels, the systemic levels of if I see a neighborhood that I think bad and what connotations I think, why is a certain region in Calgary considered poor? And you have to understand the systemic ways why they don't have grocery stores or parks. You can't just be like, that's a bad neighborhood. You got to understand how systemically that neighborhood gets less funding than another place. So you understand society, you understand social norms, you understand history. And when you understand that, I'm seeing so many of my friends who are allies getting so enraged because they went from the guilt and shame of feeling, oh, wow, I've been part of the problem, to like, I'm enraged because I've lived my life not knowing people having these experiences, and maybe I've contributed in my own little way. But when you're really awake to that and you are very passionate about that not being the future or stopping the systemic racism, that's where we're going to see people taking action. Because right now it may be trendy to like, let's talk about diversity this month because as an organization we have to, but I think a lot of boardrooms, a lot of meetings are going to have a lot of allies, a lot of white people with the tools to call out inappropriate stuff because they have done the work to understand anti-racism. So even if you think my boardroom is not diverse, my event's not diverse, there are other people who could call you out to saying, this is not working, we need diversity. So as a person of color, as a Black person, it is so exciting to see that burden not just on Black people, but other people coming on board and championing this. So it's not our burden to bear anymore.
Well, and I love the idea of, and in our context, event planning, because there is action that's being taken. Like every single day, you're putting something new in motion to get this event going. And so there's all these insertion points that I feel like that we can be having this conversation over and over with our team. We can, in how the processes are designed. I think when you're talking about systematic racism and how systems are put in place, what a gift for those of us that work in systems. It might be in a micro system with the event that you're planning, but where we can create something or a process where those things are considered. And I often say in our strategy sessions, Chido, is when we go through an event strategy session, it actually becomes like a little microcosm of what's going on in the organization around it, right? If you have communication issues in your event planning team, chances are pretty good there's communication issues in your overarching organization or in your company or in your wider planning team. It filters both ways. It's coming back and forth. But the beauty of us working on a strategy that is just this event. So we keep everything really tight to that. But there's opportunities then for us to jump into this conversation about who's on the panel. Okay. So if this is what it looks like, what is going on in your wider organization, like you were saying earlier, that is informing that decision to have a panel like this. And so we have this ability as event planners, as leaders, people that are on that management side of creating the framework for an event, to really be interjecting the conversation, like you're saying, ongoing about the systems that we're creating. Are they forward thinking? Are they innovative? Are they ones that include, like you were saying earlier, all sorts of diverse perspectives? But then in the case of racism and how it shows up, we have a responsibility to be having these conversations to the point that clients can accept and sort of move to the next step and the next step and the next step. I think that's where, for me, it gets probably more energizing when I start to see them taking a step and another step, and they're willing to go there. They might not know how, but for someone like yourself to not only assert your leadership in some of these positions, but also that education, because you have that perspective. You've been living it. You understand what could be done. So I so appreciate your 5 points, because I think those are ways that people can actually start to integrate those things into the work that they're going to do moving forward. And we're in such, I have to say, we're in such a beautiful time right now where, in the sense of, with a lot of events being postponed or delayed, even to next year, maybe they have been canceled and you're rethinking. The beautiful time right now is we can do this differently. So we can make that choice now. Chido, can I have you in, and I could, like, obviously we could chat a lot about this, but what could somebody do, given those 5 points, which, by the way, I would love to, and I'm not sure if it's going to be exactly those points, but we're launching the next issue of Moments Magazine, and you're going to have a piece in there that people can actually go to and have as a reference around what does it look like to be planning diverse events. So that's something to look forward to. But what could somebody take away from those 5 points, and it's sort of a first step for tomorrow for their planning teams?
Okay. If you're, let's say you have an event and you're really open to having this diversity, I think people sometimes don't think of accessibility. I'll give you an example. I know somebody, and they were a person of color, having an event, and they wanted diversity, and they were disappointed when they didn't see it. I bet something people are going to be saying, like, hey, we don't control who buys our events. Like, how do we get diversity just in attendees, for example? And I think even just understanding, where is your event being marketed to? Because if you're marketing to the same places, of course, you can attract the same people. Right. You know, is there a way to have event scholarships? If it's a premium event, it's like, how can we let Black people, single mothers, other people have access to our events by maybe having event scholarships? That is great to allow some people to have access to a really premium event, and just own up to your mistakes and your blind spot. And I always said, if you're going to be an ally, if you're really going to do this, don't fear making mistakes. Don't fear fumbling. It's what happens after we make mistakes, I always say, is the most important, because we're all going to make mistakes on this journey. We don't have it figured out to go into this brave new world. And I think if you're always open to listen, to not take up space, but honestly listen, someone shares their story, not to want to jump in and poke holes, and just the willingness to learn. Because I've got some of my clients are what I call allies, because they're actually making book reading circles of anti-racism book, where white people can kind of have a place to do the work and just learn. I say, educate yourself before trying to say we're not racist. I really want to encourage people, educate yourself and saying, what does that mean? Because saying I'm not racist, I think we're shifting, saying that's not enough. That's lip service, honestly. And if you can say I'm not racist, that's actually reinforcing white supremacy, because you're not willing to understand what being anti-racist in your organization and the community and events looks like.
Love that. And so I would guess that you would be open to emails and continuing that conversation for those that would love to. Chido's open. Where can they find you? Can you tell us again just a little bit about your business and where they can find you?
Yes, you can find me online at chidosamantha.com. I couldn't put my last name because it's so long. So I just went for chidosamantha.com, and my social media handle is chido_Samantha. And I'm an online business strategist, and I work with service-based providers, coaches, consultants, experts who want to earn more and sell more of their signature services online. I'm the person who kind of helps you master your business online. So it is something that you're proud of, and the online space doesn't have to be scary. It's a place that is thriving and doing so well, especially in these times of working virtually and having access to so many people. It's a very exciting time.
Very exciting. And again, the idea of Chido being this bridge between events, the event knowledge and the online knowledge, and to have that, and you have consulting and coaching options. And so really to have that conversation on where is your event going. So the whole online piece, but then also how do you increase that diversity in the events that you're planning. So thank you so much, Chido, for being here with a gift to us. That you're here. Again, I'm Lisa Garrow with Candy Event Consulting, and we are here all week. Chido, it's kind of interesting. I've mentioned my mixed family. So I have two daughters, and they are both colored, and their dad is from South Africa, but they're going to be on with me tomorrow. And it's going to be pretty cool because we've never had this conversation publicly. We have grown up with this conversation of being a mixed family. What does that mean? But we're going to be talking about that in the context of attending and planning events. And in our case, our family. So we're going to be talking about that tomorrow. Love having these conversations. I'm learning so much every single day. Hopefully you guys too. I will be doing a watch party. We'll be adding in, Chido, your information, your website, maybe even those 5 points. We'll put those bullet points in there so people can follow along. But we will hopefully see you tomorrow. And thank you again, everyone, for watching and being part of this conversation. This is about all of us working together and making a difference. So thank you again for joining us. Thanks again, Chido. We'll talk to you again real soon.
Bye.
Bye.